Hello, class. Let's talk about everyday use. I'll start by saying that I love, love, love this story. I find different things in it each time I read it, and I'm going to do my best to stay under 15 minutes in this video because I just have so much to say. What I'm going to talk about during this video is probably going to be controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. This is going to be a defense for D. I'm going to talk about how Dee was somewhat misrepresented or shown in a bad light throughout this story, and that she really has some redeeming qualities that we need to investigate. I want to begin by talking about the narrator of this story. The narrator is the mother, Mrs. Johnson. She has two daughters, and the way that she presents her daughters really changes the way that we perceive both of them. And I'm going to argue that she presents them in a way that we root for the underdog, which is a very American ideal. And in some ways, she takes other things that we would value or storylines that we would champion, and she twists them. And I think that we don't realize that it's been twisted, and we get so involved in this story of the underdog and of Maggie getting those quilts that we miss what Dee has to offer in this story. So let's start by looking at this part in the very first of the story. She says Maggie will be nervous until after her sister goes. So right from the start, she's setting up this underdog type feeling. She will stand hopelessly in corners, homely and ashamed of the burn scars down her arms and legs, eyeing her sister with a mixture of envy and awe. So it's almost like she's asking us to pity Maggie. She has burn scars, she's homely. She really doesn't have a lot of positive qualities that speak on her behalf here. She thinks her sister has held life always in the palm of one hand, that no is a word the world never learned to say to her. And I think this is interesting. She brings this up that no is a word the world never learned to say to her. This is irony because we're going to see her being told no at the end of the story. It's also a little bit of foreshadowing to tell us what's going to come up. So right from the start, she sets up a contrast between the two sisters. One that, seems to get everything handed to her, the other that has burn scars, that is not attractive, just seems to really struggle in life. And I think that as a reader, we are going to identify more with the character that struggles through life. We don't want to feel like everything's been handed to us. So we don't really identify that much with Dee. Then a few paragraphs down, we move to this line. But of course, all this does not show on television. Then the mother goes into this imagined scenario where she's on TV. Dee is giving her hugs. They're kind of living this phony life on TV. And then the mother turns to reality and says, in reality, I work more like a man. I'm not this witty person that my daughter would like me to be. And she says, but of course, all this does not show on television. What she's saying is she is not the way that she's imagining her daughter would like her to be. She says, of course, all this does not show on television. I'm the way my daughter would want me to be. 100 pounds lighter, my skin like an uncooked barley pancake. My hair glistens in the hot, bright lights. Johnny Carson has much to do to keep up with my quick and witty tongue. So she is imagining that this is how Dee wants her to be. Is this fair? Is this how Dee really wants her to be? Because we don't really see that as we move on in the story. She's not asking her mother to be different. And so maybe the mother has this kind of skewed version of Dee, possibly from the way she was as a teenager or, just her attitude in general as she was growing up. But then we get this line that I think is extremely important in understanding my defense of Dee. Who can even imagine me looking at a straight white man in the eye? It seems to me I have talked to them always with one foot raised in flight. with my head fumed in whichever way is farthest from them. Dee, though, she would always look at anyone in the eye. Hesitation was no part of her nature. Isn't this exactly what you would want in a daughter? You'd want somebody that looked the world in the eye and said, I'm not backing down from anyone. I'm not backing down from the white man. I'm not backing down from my oppressors. I'm not backing down from anything. This is a noble trait. I would say this is a trait that we all would want in our daughters. And yet this is glossed over. We're not considering this trait because of the negative traits that Dee does have. And Dee is an unlikable character, but this is exactly what I would want in a daughter. And then we move back to Maggie and we get this description of Maggie. Have you ever seen a lame animal, perhaps a dog run over by some careless person, rich enough to own a car, sidle up to someone who is ignorant enough to be kind to him? That is the way my Maggie walks. This is that contrast. And again, it's kind of creating this underdog feeling. Maggie is this character to be pitied much of the time from her mother. And so we're not really getting a fair representation of Dee and the good qualities that Dee provides. A bit later, we get lines that make me wonder, is Mrs. Johnson being completely honest, or does she really know Dee? We get this line here. I used to think she hated Maggie too. Okay, so she's saying she hated the house. She thinks that she used to hate Maggie. But that was before we raised money, the church and me, to send her to Augusta to school. Okay, so they sent Dee to school. She used to read to us without pity, forcing words, lies, other folks' habits, whole lives upon us too, sitting trapped and ignorant underneath her voice. So she used to read to them, and she's trying to educate her mother and her sister. And how does Mrs. Johnson react to that? These are lies. These are other folks' habits. This is not the world that I grew up in. So what Dee is trying to do is educate her mother and her sister. And the way that her mother responds to it is these are lies. These are other folks' habits. And Dee is trying to press that on us. What Dee's really trying to do is pull them out of the oppression that they're living in. She doesn't want her mother to fear white men. She doesn't want her mother to not be able to look them in the eye. So she's trying to educate them, and it seems like both the mother and Maggie would rather just remain in the life that they've been living. A few paragraphs later, we get this scene where the mother is talking about Dee coming to the house no matter where they're living. And Dee tells her, but I'm not going to bring my friends, which I think again is ironic because what happens when Dee shows up? She's with a friend. So Maggie and the mother, they share this little moment based on what Dee said about not bringing her friends. It says, Maggie and I thought about this, and Maggie asked me, Mama, when did Dee ever have any friends? And I think this is something that maybe they both laugh about, maybe something that, they can share as an inside joke. But it really is hurtful because Dee is this strong, powerful woman. And how do people react to that? They want nothing to do with her. They don't accept her in their society, or they don't accept her in their friendship group because she has this commanding presence, because she has this feeling about her of self-security. And so people don't accept that and they push her away. I think this is something that we can pity within Dee. And we see that with the boyfriend that she ends up with, Jimmy T. He leaves her. He doesn't want this type of woman. And so again, I think that we're given these good qualities that Dee has, and the mother is bringing in these qualities, but we can see that they're being mocked, they're being shunned. Dee is not being validated as a person here. Later on, when Dee actually shows up, the mother maybe misconstrues what Dee is trying to do here in this visit. She says, She never takes a shot without making sure the house is included. When a cow comes nibbling around the edge of the yard, she snaps it, and me and Maggie in the house. Then she puts the Polaroid in the back seat of the car and comes up and kisses me on the forehead. I think that the mother is trying to say that she is trying to exploit their upbringing or exploit the house that she grew up in, maybe as a talking point amongst her friends or a way to say that she grew up poor. I'm not convinced that she's not just trying to maintain this memory, that she's not trying to preserve the way that she grew up or preserve the memories of the house and her mom and her sister, maybe even the cow. And then she comes up and kisses her on the forehead. I see nothing wrong with that. I don't see what's so bad about Dee in what she's doing here. We also get the controversy over Dee changing her name, which in a way is a denial of her heritage, a denial of those who were named Dee before her. And the mother says, "What happened to Dee? I wanted to know." "She's dead," Wanjero said. So what I see is a denial of heritage, and the mom sees that as a denial of heritage. And Wanjero tries to explain that, but the mom isn't listening to it. I can see that viewpoint, and that's definitely there. It's not a likable argument. But when she says that Dee is dead, what she's saying is that life, that oppression, that feeling that we cannot rise and be somebody in this new world, that's dead. And I think that's what she intended to mean, even though the mother took it a different way. Let's move to the quilts. This is the climax of the story when the mother denies the quilts to Dee or Wanjero. Again, I think that because the two characters or the two sisters have been set up in the way that they are, we are prone to side with Maggie throughout all of this. So Dee is asked for two quilts. Her mother is inclined to give her two other quilts that are sewed by machine, which will last longer. And here's Dee's reply. "That's not the point," said Wanjero. "These are all pieces of dresses Grandma used to wear. She did all this stitching by hand. Imagine." She held the quilt securely in her arms, stroking them. We see this appreciation for what has gone into these quilts. Now, at this point, because of the way that Dee has been set up, the reader's likely to say, she doesn't appreciate them. She wants them as a novelty, or she wants to show off, what circumstances she came from. But I would ask, why is she not being genuine here? Maybe she does appreciate all that's gone into them. Maybe she wants to remember her grandma. She makes a point here that I think is also misconstrued. She makes the point that Maggie can sew a new quilt. Maggie has retained the knowledge of how to sew quilts. She doesn't have that knowledge. This is the only way that she can maintain that heritage and that memory of her grandmother, which her mom was just faulting her for before. This is a way that she can remember her ancestors, remember the family that's come before her. And she says, "Maggie can't appreciate these quilts," she said. "She'd probably be backward enough to put them to everyday use." So she's saying she'll ruin this. She'll not appreciate what went into these quilts. She'll just use them. So I really see this disconnect between Dee saying we need to preserve this heritage and we need to move forward in this new world in which we are not oppressed, in which we have power. And I think that her mother and Maggie are both kind of set in their old traditions, in not questioning, in just living, in settling for the man with mossy teeth. And then we get the final goodbyes. She didn't get to take the quilts with her. She's upset at this point and she leaves. But then she turns to Maggie and she kisses Maggie. So, again, I don't think this is fake. I don't think this is insincere. This very well could be out of love. And she says, "You ought to try to make something of yourself too, Maggie. It's really a new day for us." Yeah, Maggie is homely. Maggie has scars. Maggie, it says at one point she's not bright, but her sister still says, "You ought to make something of yourself, Maggie. You ought to do something. Don't settle. Don't just live this life." And she says, "But from the way you and Mama still live, you'd never know it. So you'd never know it's a new day. You're not taking advantage of the new opportunities that we have. And by not taking advantage of that, you're not going to create any change." So again, we look at Dee and we look at the qualities that she has. She is determined. She is driven. She doesn't accept no as an answer. She moves forward. And I think, isn't this someone to be celebrated? Someone that can carry forth the traditions and heritage of her ancestors. Somebody that can move into the new world, can uplift her family and move out of this life of oppression and in some ways, life of destitute. She wants better. She strives for better. Isn't that what we would want in a daughter? I know this is probably not what you imagined when you read this story. I will say I didn't either the first time I read it. I didn't the second or third time I read it. I didn't when I read it earlier this week. I just couldn't fathom that this would be a throwaway character, that the only purpose for Dee was to show the underdog story. So consider this theory, consider whether there is evidence to support it, and don't casually dismiss it. Let's give Dee a chance and let's think about how this story would be told if it was from her perspective.